Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
My name is Brendan Miller, and I am counsel to Freedom Corp, which is an entity that's representing the protesters and truckers that were in Ottawa in January and February of 2022. First, thank you for your service, and it's nice to meet you.
Thank you.
So, to begin, I understand, I'm just going to go through some of your background. I understand you have a master's in leadership from Royal Roads University with a focus on justice and public safety. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And you also have a certificate in terrorism studies from St. Andrews University in Scotland, right?
That is correct, yes.
And you've been in policing since 1990.
Yes, I have been.
So 32 years of experience and,
Yes.
and an education in that area to boot, right? So you testified that you heard the evidence of Superintendent Morris.
Portions of, yes.
Right. And you said that he's, in your chief, the foremost authority in the province of Ontario regarding intelligence. Is that right?
That is my opinion, yes.
And I take it you agree with his testimonies and the opinions he gave. I take it that's correct.
I have not listened to his testimony in totality, but I would have no reason not to agree with anything that he would provide as evidence.
Right. And I'm sure you might have heard the answers he gave to the questions I put to him with respect to threats under Section 2 of the CSIS Act. Do you remember hearing that?
I can't say that specifically I remember that, that interaction.
Right. Well, he testified that essentially, in summary, that there was no intelligence of a credible threat under Section 2 of the CSIS Act. Would you agree with that?
There was no intelligence of
There was no credible intelligence.
no credible intelligence of a threat.
Yes.
That I would agree with that.
Right.
Yes.
And so it's fair to say that based on all OPP intelligence and the intelligence provided by the RCMP and federal intelligence agencies to the OPP, to your knowledge, there was no credible threat to the security of Canada as defined in Section 2 of the CSIS Act.
That would be my understanding, yes, as determined by Superintendent Pat Morris in consultation with CSIS and the RCMP.
Thank you. And I'm sure you're aware that to invoke the Emergencies Act, that sort of threat is supposed to be required.
So I do not have intimate knowledge of the threshold that's required for invoking the Emergencies Act. That's not something that I have any responsibility for.
Thank you. And in my next question, when I say federal civil service or federal civil servant, I just want you to understand that I mean anyone from deputy minister down who is a non-elected, non-political actor working for the government of Canada. Is that understood?
That's understood, yes.
Now, in your interactions with the members of the Federal Civil Service prior to 11:59 p.m. on February 13th, 2022, isn't it true that no civil servant ever said to you that there was a credible threat of the nature of that defined in Section 2 of the CSIS Act?
That is correct.
And they never said to you that they had reasonable grounds to believe that such a threat existed, did they?
Nobody ever said that to me.
Thank you. So I want to talk with you about everyone's given various catchphrases to what was happening in Ottawa, but no one's really gone through what is a protest or, essentially a lawful demonstration, et cetera. And you seem to have an understanding of that. So I'm going to walk through that with you if that's okay.
Certainly.
Can you agree that in general protest law and sort of criminal offenses that you essentially have three types? You have your lawful protest protected under Section 2B and 2, all Section 2 really of the Charter.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you have unlawful assembly.
Yes.
And then you have riot.
Yes.
Right. So those are really the three sort of categories of these assemblies. Is that fair? Demonstrations.
That's fair.
All right. So I just want to start with lawful protest, and you touched on that. And lawful protest, as you said, is protected by the Charter, and that's primarily Section 2. And can you agree that the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of association, they collectively essentially protect people's right to assemble and protest?
Yes.
Right. And people are entitled to gather in groups in public spaces and protest government action as long as they don't essentially move into an unlawful assembly, correct?
Correct, yes.
Right. And they can get together in large numbers, go outside Parliament, and protest.
I can't say to what extent they can go outside Parliament. There's the Trespass to Property Act that has to be taken into consideration as well, and I'm not familiar enough with what is permitted on those grounds to say yes or no.
Right, but they can go in public spaces.
Yes.
Okay. And then unlawful assembly, police have the power under Section 63 of the Criminal Code to arrest and charge people for the offense of unlawful assembly, right?
Yes,
And you don't need any form of special order for that. That can just be carried out by a police officer.
that is correct.
Right. And I take it that you're aware that an unlawful assembly is where 3 or more people with a common purpose assemble in such a manner and conduct themselves to cause persons in the neighborhood of the assembly. Yeah.
Slowly when you're reading,
Yes.
please.
Oh, sorry, I'm now fast, Brendan. I thought I was slow, Brendan, after hearing my friend, but I'll try to get onto that. So it's when they assemble in such a manner that conduct themselves to cause persons in the neighborhood of the assembly to fear on reasonable grounds that they will disturb the peace tumultuously or needlessly cause or provoke other persons to disturb the peace tumultuously. You're aware of that?
I'm aware of that. That sounds very familiar with what is in the criminal code. I hesitate to agree word for word without having it in front of me, but it
Yeah.
sounds very reasonable. Thank you.
And I take it you're aware that to disturb the peace tumultuously requires there to be more than a boisterous or noisy, disorderly conduct. It has to be something a little more.
Yes,
Right. And you know that causing an actual disturbance of the peace tumultuously actually isn't required to even arrest people for unlawful assembly. It just has to be that there's a reasonable fear that it's going to happen. That's what really differentiates it from a riot, right?
I would agree with that.
Right. And that an unlawful assembly, you know, so a lawful assembly can at times, of course, become an unlawful assembly when it becomes unruly and gets into the riot category, right?
Yes,
Okay. And so I understand, and you probably understand, that a riot, in order to get into a riot under the law, it requires actual or threatened force or violence in addition to, you know, the public disorder, right?
yes,
And even without this, if you don't even get to that threshold, you're aware, and we've heard about the Riot Act and the Criminal Code, that a mayor, a sheriff, or a justice of the peace, or a justice of the Ontario Court of Justice can come out and read the Riot Act and invoke it and demand people disperse.
I'm familiar that that is contained in the criminal code. I don't have intimate knowledge of that, though.
Right. And then, of course, outside of all of this, you have injunctions. And
Yes.
any individual or the city can run off and make an application for an injunction before a court of competent jurisdiction. And if they meet the test, the court can grant an injunction. And then once that injunction is granted, if it's not followed, the police then have jurisdiction under Section 127 of the Criminal Code to charge individuals with violating a court order.
That is correct, yes.
All right. So those are the general things that exist outside of the Emergencies Act, right? They're there always.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So I now want to talk to you about Ottawa in particular, now that we've gone over that. Now, regarding the truckers and the protesters in Ottawa, I understand they rolled in here and did so at the direction of police officers once they arrived. Not, of course, they weren't invited. But when they arrived here on January 27th and 28th, is it your understanding that they parked where they were told to originally, and everything was essentially coordinated originally about where they were going to go?
I don't know that I can comment with accuracy on that because, as you will recall from my previous testimony, I was under the understanding that there would be designated parking which would not facilitate any form of protest out in front of the Parliament buildings.
Okay.
So that would best be posed to Ottawa Police, who were in charge of the operation at
Right.
the time.
And we can agree then that, you know, parking on streets and highways in a way that would usually violate the law, right, where they're essentially blocking everything, that could be considered an unlawful assembly.
That could be, yes. And there are authorities to deal with that.
Right. And I take it, though, you're familiar with the doctrine of officially induced error, where the government official tells you to do something that may be illegal, but because they tell you to do it, you don't believe it to be. You're familiar with that from your studies.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
The
Sorry?
doctrine of officially induced error, where a government official tells you to do something that may in fact not be legal, but you do it because the government official tells you to, and therefore you believe that it is legal because they told you to do it. Are you familiar with that doctrine?
That's very complex law that
Okay.
is beyond my education and comprehension. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So now you do know that after these vehicles arrived in the city, that there was construction equipment as well as eventually, I believe the following day, cement barriers put up so that no one could come in, but no one could also go out. You're aware of that, the vehicles.
I was
trucks?
aware that there were cement barriers in place, but I was not on the ground to observe where they were or what impact they would have had.
Right, but you can agree with me that if there's barriers on both sides of a road where individuals have parked their trucks, the truck can't drive through the barrier, can't drive over it, it can't really drive around it. Is that fair?
That sounds reasonable, yes.
Right. If I could bring up document ssm.nsc.can.0000209_rel.0001. It's the incident response group minutes from February 10th, 2022. Okay, and could we just scroll down to page 5 there, please? And zoom in on the first paragraph? The big one there, scroll down, please. Perfect. Okay, so I just want to take you to the 5th line there, and I'm just going to read it out to you. And this is Commissioner Lucky's sort of summary to them on February 10th. And she says, the RCMP Commissioner added that the engagement continues with the Ontario Provincial Police and the Ottawa Police Service. The RCMP has provided all resources requested by OPS. OPP resources have also been provided, and there is good consideration, good cooperation between the OPP and RCMP. There are indications that some of the protesters would like to leave but are unable to do so given physical barriers. An integrated planning cell is developing a plan of action, and the preference remains to continue moving forward with negotiations, with enforcement actions to start early next week if negotiations remain unsuccessful. A surge and contain strategy will be employed for the upcoming weekend. Does that summary, as of February 10th, 2022, is that summary accurate of where things were at with OPP and your understanding of everything?
I would say that is accurate. Save and accept, surge and contain are not terms that are generally used within the OPP. And as it relates to your previous question around physical barriers, those could be barriers put in place by police, could be put in place by protesters. I know there was some concerns that people did want to leave, but they were boxed in by other vehicles.
Right.
And they did not feel as though they could leave of their own accord without the assistance of the police.
Right. And so I'm going to first, there's 2 aspects in there I want to discuss with you. The first is enforcement. So on February 10th, 2022, in those minutes it says, and this is of course before the Emergencies Act was invoked, it says that enforcement was going to start on Monday, February 14th, 2022 if negotiations did not work, right? That was going to happen anyway.
Yes, that was going to happen anyways. They were on a timeline focused on de-escalation and negotiation. With the anticipated approval of the plan, there was the intent to move forward, yes.
And as you already said, that could have all been done without the invocations of the Emergencies Act, much like Commissioner Lucky of the RCMP said in that email that you agreed with earlier.
Yes.
Right. And now I want to talk to you about the issue with the barriers, and we'll sort of address that. Now, that summary there, you said is there's physical barriers preventing people from leaving, whether it be put there by the city or whether it be other trucks. That's a fact. People couldn't go and take their trucks and leave.
That was a fact, yes.
All right. So once the concrete barriers went up and people were stuck, they're stuck there. They can't move their trucks. They can physically walk away, but they'd have to leave it there and go away. Fair?
I will take your explanation on that as fair. Now,
prior to these barriers being put up and prior to not being able to leave, you're not going to hear me argue otherwise, those trucks are an unlawful assembly. But once a government entity like the City of Ottawa and everything is all stuck and they can't move, can you agree that those individuals and those trucks that were stuck there, and I know this is not a question of law, but is it something that you would charge them with, in your opinion, when they can't actually leave? Are they assembled, intentionally? Are they someone there that they would have grounds to lay a charge where these individuals who the only reason they're unlawfully assembled is that these trucks are stuck, but it's not their fault? So would you agree that once the barriers went up and once these individuals' vehicles were stuck, that there was no unlawful assembly?
I don't think I could agree that there was no lawful assembly. And it's what came first and what came second. Were people trapped and couldn't get out because the barriers were up? Or were they trapped and couldn't get out because other trucks and heavy equipment were blocking them in? But I think what's fundamental to your question is the discretion as to whether there are reasonable and probable grounds to lay a charge rests with the police officers who would investigate that unlawful assembly.
Right. And I can tell you already in evidence is the charges that were laid. And would you be interested to know that there's not a single charge of unlawful assembly that was laid in this case, in all of Ottawa during the protest?
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So
You're out of time, so if you can wrap up.
Yes, I will. So just on the issue with Inspector Bedoin, if I could just scroll down to page 7 of the document on the screen, page 7, and the bottom of page 7. Nope, sorry, apology, bottom of page 6, top of page 7. Okay. So here, this document is, again, the same one from before, but this is the actual plan that Inspector Bedoin had approved and you approved with the PLTs. It was actually put to cabinet. Did you know that?
So a point of clarification, I did not approve a plan.
Okay.
I did authorize Inspector Baudin to have conversation with Deputy Minister Stewart. I did not approve a plan, nor did I approve anything that went to cabinet.
Right. But is it fair to say, of course, no one knew it went to cabinet, and I understand that. But is it fair to say that the plan that Baudin drafted, you supported that plan as an action plan?
I did not see that plan, but I have all the confidence in the world. Inspector Baudouin, he is an absolute national expert as it relates to provincial liaison teams, negotiation, and de-escalation. So I would have no reason to question his advice that he provided.
And were you aware that Commissioner Lucky also supported that plan?
I was aware that Commissioner Lucky had insight into the discussions that had taken place between the inspector and the deputy minister.
Right. And the deputy minister, of course, he had input into the plan. It was his final approved plan that he put before cabinet, of course, right?
I can't comment. I didn't see a plan. This is the first I'm seeing any documentation in relation to it.
Can you agree with me that when it comes to law enforcement in this province, and with the federal apparatus, that the 3 most senior individuals in law enforcement would be yourself, Commissioner Lucky, and the Deputy Minister, Rob Stewart, with respect to individuals in the civil service? Is that fair?
I'm not a federal civil servant.
I mean, provincial.
I wouldn't indicate that the deputy minister is part of law enforcement, and policing is not a hierarchy. I am not above a municipal police chief and a rank structure, so I would not agree with that.
Right, but in the provincial apparatus, you are the most senior law enforcement individual in the province. Is that fair?
Within the Ontario Provincial Police, I am the highest ranking police officer.
Right, and then Commissioner Lucky is that for the RCMP?
For the RCMP.
And the Deputy Minister, of course, is the highest civil servant in public safety that sort of oversees and looks at for the political branch and manages those sort of areas. Is that fair?
That's a question best posed to the Deputy Minister, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.